Welcome to the African Weekly Roundup, a weekly program every Sunday here on HORUFADHI Media, where I discuss the latest news and events across the African continent. I'm Sudan Mohammed, your host and producer here on HORUFADHI Media. We hope you find this program very informative. Please like, share, and for similar content, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media. Also, do subscribe to HORUFADHI Media Group's second channel, known as HORUFADHI TV, where you can find other exclusive programs, just behind the scenes and Mhahe Sala, among others. And last but not least, do follow myself, Sultan Mohammed, Suleiman Hashi, Yasin Abdi, and the wider HORUFADHI Media team on our social media platforms that should appear on the screen any moment. Let's get straight into the headlines. We kick off in Sudan, where Sudan's rival factions accuse each other of fresh violations of ceasefires that is set to expire on Sunday as the deadly conflict continued for a third week despite warnings of a slide towards catastrophic civil war. Hundreds of people have been killed and thousands wounded since a long simmering power struggle between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces erupted into conflict on April 15th, just over 2 weeks ago. Locked in a battle for Khartoum, Sudan's capital on the Nile, the parties have fought on despite a series of ceasefires secured by mediators including the United States, the latest of which expired at midnight. The situation in Khartoum, where the army has been battling RSF forces entrenched in residential areas, was relatively calm on Sunday morning, after heavy clashes were heard on Saturday evening in the city centre. The army said on Sunday it had destroyed RSF convoys moving towards Khartoum from the west. The RSF said the army had used artillery and warplanes to attack its positions in a number of areas in Khartoum province. In an apparent bid to boost its troops, the army said on Saturday that the Central Reserve Police had begun to deploy in southern Khartoum and would be deployed gradually in other areas of the capital. Sudan's police said that the force had been deployed to protect markets and property that had been subjected to looting. The RSF on Saturday warned it is against becoming involved in the fighting. Now, the force is a large and heavily armed division of Sudan's police force that has fighting experience from conflicts in western region of Darfur and the Nuba Mountains in southern Sudan. In March 2022, the US imposed sanctions on this police force, accusing it of using excess force against protesters who were demonstrating against the 2021 military coup. Now, the fighting in Khartoum has so far seen RSF forces fan out across the city as the army tries to target them largely by using airstrikes from drones and fighter jets. The conflict has sent tens of thousands of people fleeing across Sudan's borders and prompted warnings the country could disintegrate and destabilize an already volatile region. Now, Army Leader General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan has said he would never sit down with General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hameti, and the RSF chief in return said he would talk only after the army ceased hostilities. Now, the Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister Prince Faisal ibn Farhan, whose government has played a part in mediating the ceasefires, met Burhan envoy Dafallah al-Haji Ali in Riyadh, the Saudi Foreign Ministry said. And the US Special Representative to Sudan, Volker Perthes, told media on Saturday he had recently sensed a change in the side's attitudes and that they were more open to negotiations or were saying they would accept some form of talks, though no timetable has been set. Now, the United Nations reported only 16% of health facilities in Khartoum are operating as normal. The International Committee of Red Cross, or the ICRC, delivered 8 tons of medical supplies thus far. But while approval had been given for the supplies to go to Khartoum, negotiations were ongoing with the sides to facilitate the delivery within the city, where hospitals, convoys and ambulances have been attacked. At least 5 aid workers have been killed in the fighting so far, and a third of Sudan's 46 million people needed humanitarian aid before the fighting even began. And the fighting has derailed an internationally backed political transition aimed at establishing a democratic government in Sudan, where former autocratic President Omar Hassan al-Bashir was toppled in 2019 after 3 decades in power. At least 528 people have been killed so far and 4,599 people wounded, according to the Sudani Health Ministry. The UN has reported a similar number of dead, but believes the real toll is much higher. Sudan's former Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok warned on Saturday that the conflict could deteriorate into one of the world's worst civil wars. He said, "God forbid if Sudan is to reach a point of civil war proper. Syria, Yemen and Libya will be a small play." Hamdok told an event in Nairobi, "I think it would be a nightmare for the world and for Africa," he said. Now, moving over to West Africa in Burkina Faso, where residents and survivors of a massacre in a Burkina Faso village said on Saturday 136 people, including women and children, were killed, blaming the country's security forces for the April 20th attack. A prosecutor last week launched a probe into the massacre, which took place in the northern village of Karma and surrounding areas, following reports that people were wearing the uniform of the Burkina armed forces had killed around 60 civilians. Now, the attack on which is one of the worst on civilians in the country, as it battles armed militants linked to Al-Qaeda and Daesh, has prompted condemnations and calls for an investigation by the UN Human Rights Office. Now, Burkina Faso is one of several West African nations struggling with a violent Islamist insurgency that has spread from neighboring Mali over the past decade, killing thousands and displacing over 2 million people. The country's military government has launched a large-scale offensive which it says is aimed at reclaiming swathes of territory controlled by the armed militants. The government condemned the attack on Karma in a statement on April 27th, but gave no details on the casualties. Since then, more details have emerged. Now, a statement issued by residents and survivors on Saturday said the village was surrounded early in the morning of April 20th by heavily armed men in Burkina Faso military uniform, on motorcycles, pickup trucks, and armed vehicles. The villagers initially rejoiced at their arrival, but their joy was quickly shattered by gunfire, the statement said, adding that they had counted 136 civilians killed and 9 injured. Now, a representative of the residents and survivors speaking at a press conference in the provincial capital around 15 kilometers from the village where it took place in Karma said the government's statement bordered on indifference and contempt for the residents of the village of Karma. Now, the statement sows confusion about the responsibility of security and defense forces for the massacre, he said. We, population survivors of the events of Karma and surroundings, have no doubt that the security and the defense forces that are responsible for this carnage. We are not fooled. We know our security and defense forces well, the statement said. Now, the government said an attack on a military base in the eastern Burkina Faso had killed 33 soldiers and wounded 12 others. The besieged soldiers killed allegedly at least 40 terrorists on Thursday before reinforcements arrived. An army said in a statement the attack targeted military detachments in a number of cities in the region. Now, Burkina Faso's armed forces have battled rebels since 2014, and the ongoing violence has sparked anger within the military, fueling 2 coups last year that led to the ascent of current leader, Captain Ibrahim Traoré. Now, he's promised to reconquer lost ground as he has pledged and reinforced his military, but attacks on security forces and civilians have only worsened since the start of 2023, inflicting hundreds of deaths. Now, Traoré has said he's committed to a plan by the preceding military administration to hold elections for civilian government by 2024, which is next year. And finally, over to Nigeria, where gunmen in Nigeria have released 74 children out of more than 80 people who had been abducted earlier this month in northwestern Zamfara state after ransoms were paid, parents and a village head said on Saturday. Gangs of armed men have attacked hundreds of local communities across northwestern Nigeria in recent years, while Islamist militants continue to stage attacks in the northeast. A village head in Wadzamaya said 11 people still being held, but 2 more were killed trying to escape from their captors. Now, the police spokesman for Zamfara state that they could not immediately comment. Now, kidnappers in Nigeria often keep their victims for months in the forests if a ransom is not paid, and also demand villagers pay protection fees to be allowed to farm and harvest their crops on their own land and ensure that they are not attacked with kidnapping. Now, 2 parents from Zamfara's Wadzamia village said they had paid 20,000 naira, which is equivalent to $43.50 each, and their children were among those released on Friday and had suffered from severe malnutrition. And those are the top stories on the African Weekly Roundup this week. Please tune in next week for further updates across the African continent.